that half-converted people very prone to abandon it and find themselves in the state of an apostate. And there will be a lot of them because there are so many churches that are preaching an inadequate gospel that are filled with non-Christians who think they're Christians, many of whom will at some point deconstruct because there was no real satisfaction in the brand of Christianity that they were exposed to. I found a letter, just to give you an illustration, really a typical letter. I read a lot of them, but this is a letter from a girl who deconstructed happily, and this gives you kind of a feeling for what is very, very typical. She identifies herself this way: I self-identify as an ex-evangelical pastor's daughter, missionary kid, who went through a crisis of sexuality, a crisis of faith, and am now a lesbian with the most amazing partner. And she tells her story in these few words. My own journey of deconstruction began well before I was aware of it. As a high schooler on various social media sites like Tumblr and MySpace, and surrounded by peers coming from backgrounds and walks of life completely foreign to me, I began to see that my worldview was much too narrow to encompass so much of life. What really got my attention was the multiple friends and acquaintances throughout those 4 years in school who embraced gender identities and sexualities much different from what I had been brought up to understand. Even as I spoke the familiar phrases, love the sinner, hate the sin, Jesus loves everybody, I saw that my intent and my impact were incredibly different. My words were meant to soothe and comfort lost souls in search of healing. Instead, they alienated those I loved and elevated me to a higher, more enlightened circle wherein they were not welcome. In 2014, Leela Alcorn, a transgender teenage girl, committed suicide in Ohio. I learned about her death because she had left a final post on Tumblr in which she said, "There's no winning, there's no way out." Her family had forced her into faith-based conversion therapy in life and buried her under the wrong name in death. Leela's passing shocked me into waking up to a more bitter reality than I had previously lived in. LGBTQ youths' lives were endangered by the very people I trusted to protect and provide truth to them. Just a footnote, LGBTQ lives are put in danger by Christians. That's the message. As I thought and talked about this tragedy, I realized that most Christians in my day-to-day life weren't aware or weren't interested in this topic. Those who would discuss it with me had a very different perspective than those in the LGBTQ community who were putting themselves in danger due to their lifestyles. In other words, as long as they're living out a homosexual lifestyle, they're safe. As soon as they get anywhere near a Christian, they've put themselves in danger. I couldn't believe I saw the ways in which Christians, either actively or passively, played a hand in Leela's death, and I knew something was wrong. My interest in LGBTQ issues allowed me to admit to myself that I didn't experience attraction to men the same way many female friends around me did. It took a few more years of unlearning a lot of homophobia to understand that I'm attracted to women and that this doesn't leave me isolated from the love of God. It seemed no one wanted us unless we were willing to change ourselves to the core of our souls in order to reflect the same whitewashed heterosexual identities Christian leaders presented the world. And that's the issue. They don't want to give up their sin. She goes on, I learned about liberation theology, womanist theology, and the other dozens of perspectives that can be utilized when looking at the Bible as well as Christian history and theology. I'm no longer in a race against time to save every non-Christian person I know. I have a larger, more expansive view of myself, my fellow humans, and of God. I'm in community with other fantastic seekers of the Christ. That's full-scale, outright, complete rebellion. So that Christianity is now the enemy. The enemy. That is very typical of the kind of things you read over and over and over again. And again, I just say for you to understand, people aren't jettisoning Christianity because the Bible doesn't make sense. They're jettisoning Christianity because they don't want to give up their transgressions. They don't want to give up their wretched lifestyle. And if there's any one dominant lifestyle that appears more than any other, it's homosexuality. I mean, obviously, it's everywhere in this culture. And it's a major factor in Christian deconstruction. And if that's where you deconstruct that severe dysfunctional iniquity, you can imagine that lesser sins would make deconstruction even easier. So this is what we face. So how are we to understand this? And with that, we go back to John 6. Back to John 6. How are we to understand this? Well, here is an incident in John 6 that gives us insight into that question. I'm just going to read it very quickly and make a few comments. Verse 60, Jesus teaching in Capernaum.